11 years ago, a team of 24 Navy SEALs flew under the cover of darkness into Abbottabad, Pakistan, to carry out one of the most important counterterrorism missions in history, to capture or kill Osama bin Laden. 30 minutes into that mission, the SEALs had their man, and something they were not expecting: thousands of pages of Osama bin Laden's personal letters and notes. In 2017, the CIA declassified most of those letters without context and little translation. Author and Islamic scholar Nellie Lahoud wanted to read it all. She spent much of her career researching Al-Qaeda with stints at Harvard and Cambridge universities, and she's fluent in Arabic. So she dug in, carefully examining many of those documents line by line. Tonight, we'll hear what she found, gaining a rare glimpse into the inner sanctum of Al-Qaeda through the bin Laden Papers.
The story will continue in a moment.
This is the bustling city of Abbottabad, Pakistan. From overhead, you can still see the scar in the landscape. This vacant lot, where boys now play cricket, is where Osama bin Laden's home once stood, and where the world's most wanted terrorists hid until the evening of May 1st, 2011.
Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
The operation, called Neptune's Spear, took 30 minutes, but then one SEAL alerted command that they'd found a ton of computers and electronics and needed more time. The SEALs were granted 10 more minutes that stretched into 18. They grabbed computers, VHS tapes, books, thumb drives, hard drives, and notebooks, carrying them out in bags strung around their neck. How important was that last-minute decision by the SEAL team to take those documents?
Bin Laden's greatest fear was about exposing Al-Qaeda's secrets. And so the fact that the SEALs decided to recover these letters ensured that Al-Qaeda's secrets were exposed.
In 2012, Nellie Lahoud was teaching at West Point when the CIA declassified the first 17 documents from the raid. She was asked to lead the analysis of those documents for West Point's Combating Terrorism Center. For the last 5 years, she's been reading, translating, and analyzing the remaining declassified documents, consulting with U.S. generals, admirals, and members of the Special Forces community to make sense of it all. There are home videos like this one of Osama bin Laden's son Hamza getting married in Iran. Family photos, audio files, and letters, 500,000 files in all. Nellie Lahoud focused on 6,000 pages of them for her book, The Bin Laden Papers. So you were creating kind of a narrative based on all of the documents.
And you couldn't do it any other way. You couldn't have a division of labor where several people would take on because they're all so connected. Vague references in one letter can only be explained if you looked at several other letters. So really, to get a grasp of what was really going on, you really need to be able to have read them all together.
Letters were the only way Osama bin Laden communicated with Al-Qaeda associates for nearly a decade because he was trying to evade capture. Bin Laden had television in his compound but didn't have access to the internet or phone, so everything was written by hand or on computers and encrypted on flash drives that were given to couriers to deliver. All the letters were backed up on hard drives.
We see in the letters diminutive Bin Laden, somebody who is very different from this powerful figure that we were reading about daily in the newspapers for over a decade. And the disconnect between his ambitions and between his capabilities is confounding.
That disconnect was clear immediately after the 9/11 attacks.
Al-Qaeda did not anticipate that the United States would go to war.
What did they think was going to happen?
It's a limited airstrike, but they didn't think that they would go beyond that.
But as the war raged on in Afghanistan, Lahoud says these letters show that Osama bin Laden was surprised by how Americans reacted to 9/11.
He thought that the American people would take to the streets, replicate the anti-Vietnam War protest, and they would put pressure on their governments to withdraw from Muslim-majority states.
A large miscalculation.
A huge miscalculation.
In November of 2002, U.S. intelligence officials warned Al-Qaeda might be planning, quote, spectacular attacks that could cause mass casualties. But Lahoud says letters show that by that time, Al-Qaeda was weak. Top leaders had been killed or forced into hiding, and the terrorist organization was rudderless.
There is definitely a narrative that bin Laden was still controlling Al-Qaeda from behind the scenes, the puppet master, somewhere hidden away. But is that what the papers show?
Far from it.
So he was not calling the shots at that?
Absolutely not.
She says Osama bin Laden didn't communicate with his Al-Qaeda associates for 3 years because he was on the run. It's still unknown exactly where he was hiding. But in 2004, he reconnects with Al-Qaeda in this letter, offering surviving members his new plan to attack America.
He's very eager to replicate the 9/11 attacks in the United States. You know, he is mindful that now the security conditions are very difficult at airports.
She read us part of this chilling letter from Osama bin Laden to the head of Al-Qaeda's International Terror Unit. Bin Laden writes that rather than hijack a plane, operatives should charter one for their next attack on the U.S., and adds if that's too difficult, they should target U.S. railways. Then bin Laden, who had a degree in civil engineering, explains exactly how to do it.
He wanted to have 12 meters of steel rail removed so that this way the train could be derailed. And we find him explaining the simple toolkit that they could use. You know, he said, here, you could use a compressor, you could use smelting iron tool.
He's in those small details.
At the most granular level.
What
yes.
does that say to you?
He's very methodical, very methodical. He thinks he doesn't want to leave anything for chance.
Fortunately, he was never able to execute his plan, because Lahoud says Al-Qaeda had been gutted by the war. She read us this letter from Tawfiq, a young associate who was running operations for Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan. He's telling Osama bin Laden just how incapacitated the terror organization had become.
The weakness, failure, and aimlessness that befell us were harrowing. We Muslims were defiled and desecrated. Our state was ripped asunder. Our lands were occupied. Our resources were plundered.
And so he's giving the state of Al-Qaeda to Osama bin Laden, who probably hasn't heard this at this point.
He didn't know the reality. And he actually warns him that I'm going to tell you the truth as it is. And I know that some of the brothers here are not telling you everything in detail because they don't want to upset you, particularly because of the delicate situations in which you find yourself with.
That delicate situation is bin Laden's life in hiding. By 2005, Osama bin Laden was living behind the 18-foot walls of the Abbottabad compound he shared with some of his wives, children, and grandchildren, seen here in this video seized during the raid. In this clip, bin Laden's 22-year-old son Khalid is showing off the compound's meager gardens and animals he tends to. Khalid also recorded his father's public statements that were intended to be seen around the world. You can hear him giggling as the lights malfunction. But Nellie Lahoud says it was actually two of bin Laden's daughters who played the greater role in crafting their father's messages and jihad missions.
The people who really worked on Osama's public statements were mostly his daughters, Maryam and Sumaya. And at one of the pages, we find Osama soliciting explicitly, start thinking about the ideas that need to go into the public statement. That's his own words.
Is this surprising how involved they were?
Yes, it was. It was surprising to me. In the world of Al-Qaeda and of jihadism broadly, women are not part of the public face of jihad.
But privately, the bin Laden women were very involved. In this letter to a relative, bin Laden's wife Siham is mourning the loss of a daughter who died in childbirth. But then the tone quickly changes.
And then she goes on to shame and at the same time incite the men to take up jihad. And she says, our women and children are suffering while the men are being servile and coward. So that's the kind of personality that we are encountering about the women in the compound, yes.
Al-Qaeda was also running low on cash. Lahoud says documents show that in 2006, Al-Qaeda had just $200,000 in its coffers and was unable to support or control an increasingly fractious jihad. Still, she says, Osama bin Laden kept plotting. Lahoud showed us this letter to another young associate, Yunus, who'd impressed bin Laden with his sharp intellect.
It says, this is specifically addressed to you, top secret, do not share it with anyone.
It is Osama bin Laden's plan for another terror attack in 2010. This time, he wanted to target multiple crude oil tankers and major shipping routes around the Middle East and Africa.
He says, it does not escape you, the importance of oil for industrialized economy today. And it is similar to blood for human beings. So if you cause somebody to bleed excessively, even if you don't kill him, you'll at least weaken him. And that's what he really wanted to do to the American economy.
She says bin Laden details how Al-Qaeda operatives should integrate themselves into those port areas as fishermen. He instructs them exactly where to buy a specific kind of wooden boat to evade radar, and then, once again, goes into the granular details of his plan.
The boats need to carry a large volume of explosives, preferably placed in an arch position facing the vessel.
So he's not only telling them what explosives to buy, he's telling them how to place the explosives.
In an arch position.
But his final plan to attack seems to have been halted by something he never saw coming. The Arab Spring. According to this family notebook, a unique item seized in the raid, the peaceful protests were confusing and concerning to the bin Ladens.
On one level, they were very excited by the fact that the people were able to bring down dictators. But at the same time, there were all these question marks about what is the value of jihad at the moment. And we find this really throughout this notebook. Is jihad still necessary?
Lahoud says bin Laden, seen here in the final months of his life, was struggling with the answer to that question before he was killed. U.S. intelligence agencies say most Al-Qaeda terrorist activity is now being carried out by smaller Al-Qaeda offshoots. Bin Laden's second in command, Ayman al-Zawahiri, now heads Al-Qaeda. This month, he appeared in a new video denouncing the enemies of Islam.